Welcome viewers to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about anything to do with personal injuries, that is legislation, cases, and we'll look at the law, how it affects you when it comes to personal injury. My name's Tony Carbone, personal injury lawyer of over 25 years experience. Tonight I've got with me John Carancis, an accredited law specialist.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening, viewers.
Makes you a surgeon, John.
A surgeon in personal injury law, Tony.
That's it. And we've also got the pleasure of having tonight Professor Spencer Zivskak, who's also a former Barrister of Law, and he graduated from Melbourne University in 1976. Sorry to give your age, Doctor.
That's all right.
And also he currently practices as a Professor at Law at the Australian College of University. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
Good evening.
The topic tonight, viewers, is tasers and how it affects the community. Now,
very interesting, Tony, but before we get to that, viewers, what's in the news, Tony?
Well, John, what's in the news is this incident involving an overseas fellow by the name of Roberto Curti,
From
South American, who was tasered to death, Professor.
From Brazil, Tony.
Yes.
He was here on an expired visa.
Yes.
And, well, I'm not sure if you know the facts, but...
yeah, he went into to a convenience store.
In King's Cross in Sydney. He was went into a convenience store, Tony. 5 policemen on CCTV footage are seen chasing after him. He's apparently then left, taken a packet of biscuits, Tony.
Or alleged.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
That's not yet been proven, so he may well have done nothing.
And then there's video footage, Tony, CCTV footage of him being tasered in the back by policemen, and he dies on the spot.
Professor, why would he have died from being hit with a taser?
Well, in this instance, he may well have died, first because he wasn't tasered just once, that is, he wasn't given just one 50,000 volt shot with a taser. He was tasered by 3 different police. So he was hit with a 50,000 volt shot on 3 occasions by 3 different policemen. The recommended procedure with tasers is that you fire it once or at the very most twice. In this instance, he was hit 3 times, and in those circumstances, you're running a real risk of causing serious damage.
And also, Professor, capsicum spray was used on him also.
That's right.
It's shocking, Tony, isn't it?
It is. Well, we'll keep moving on because there's a lot of examples.
Just before that, Tony, Acting Commissioner Alan Clark in the news reporting said he could not say how many times the tasers were fired, and all details will come out in due course. But then he goes, I think it is very presumptuous for anyone to determine the cause of death as a taser simply because it occurred in an incident where a taser has been utilised.
Professor,
Tony,
would it be difficult to audit
causation?
The tasers?
How do you mean?
Well, was it fired once, twice, 5, 6, 7, 10 times?
As we understand it, the taser was fired 3 times. That is, 3 policemen fired it once each. And that already exceeds the maximum recommended times, which is 2.
But is there any way of auditing the tasers to work out whether it was fired more than 3 times?
Well, the police would know that, and they should release the appropriate information. But as we understand it, 3 times.
Do we know if taser cam was on this taser, Professor?
I'm not clear about whether taser cam was on it. If taser cams were on it, then it would be very easy to determine how many times it was used.
OK, can I move on from that? There was another incident in King's Cross again, John.
Yes. Involving
a 14-year-old boy who was in I believe, a stolen car, is run up onto a pavement and knocked over a female pedestrian and was then shot by the police, Professor.
Yes, he was.
Now, is this an instance where a taser would have been appropriate?
Well, this was an incident that only occurred yesterday evening, Tony, so it's a little early to make
any comment.
Clear conclusions about it. But one would have to say that first, there was some danger to members of the public because we had a car being driven by a 14-year-old person. He shouldn't have been driving in the first place. Drove it up onto the pavement and knocked a pedestrian over. Now, that was a serious situation. Now, I would have thought at that point the car would have stopped, but nevertheless, no matter what happened, the next thing was that the police sought to prevent any further driving by taking out their guns and shooting not only the driver, who was 14 years old, but the person who accompanied him, who was 18 years old. And one would have to say that although there was danger, clearly, whether or not shooting people with guns was a proportionate response is something that one would have to doubt.
Sounds like a Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movie, Doctor. Professor.
Well, it does a little bit, doesn't it?
John, what do you think about that instance? What do you do? Do you taser them? How do you stop them from knocking anyone else over?
Tony, I guess we should go back to basics. As in, well, what is a taser? What's it going to be used for in Australia?
Well, why don't you tell us what a taser... Professor, can you tell us what a taser is?
Yes, very briefly. It's an instrument that looks like a gun, but it doesn't have bullets. Instead, it is powered by an electrical charge. So it's a way of electrocuting a person, essentially.
OK, but the voltage is 50,000 volts. Does anyone know how powerful that is?
Well, it's enough to completely disable a person with one shot. That's the principle.
So we're talking about a stun gun here?
We're talking about a stun gun, yep.
That produces an electrical charge that will render the person unconscious, and that will, basically they'll fall down and probably hit their head and
that's a big issue too, John.
Be injured in that way also.
Well, I think we need to be clear. Tasers can be used in one of two ways. You can either use it by placing it against a person's body, in which case it inflicts very severe pain.
Something what you see in the movies like that.
And burns.
And burns. And secondly, you can use it in what's called probe mode, which is when you actually fire it like a gun at a person and two powerful electric shocks are then injected into the person, and normally speaking, that is sufficient to completely disable a person. They drop to the ground and that's about it.
Professor, do you know how many jurisdictions around the world actually use tasers?
I can't tell you about around the world, but the proposal currently is that tasers are rolled out to every policeman on the beat in Victoria, and Victoria is the fourth state in Australia to commence the use of these weapons.
And John, my understanding is tasers supposed to be an alternative to using a gun.
Well, that's what's been put out there, Tony, but we all know that I think it's just a bit too simple just to have that as an alternative. We need to find out, Tony, exactly what are the physiological and physiological reaction on the body by the use of the taser, Tony.
OK, we've got to go to a sponsors break, so please viewers stay tuned. We'll come back to this debate after the break. Thank you.